Merba l-semmija ta' Campus 103.7 u nistedinkom tqattaw dan it-30 minuta li ġejjin fl-imkien magħna waqt il-programm Il-Fakulta tal-Mużika. Dan tal-lum huwa 6 episodju minn din is-sensiela. Bħal kull ġimgħa miegħi jkolli mistieden jew mistiedna sabiex flimkien niddiskutu u nitkellmu ftit dwar aspetti differenti tal-mużika. Għal-programm tal-lum ser neqelbu għal-lingwa tal-Ingliż. Mhux ser nagħmlu hekk kapriċċ imma għaliex il-mistiedna tagħna illum hija l-pjanista u l-għalliema tal-mużika Julia Miller ta' nazzjonalità Pollakka. U flimkien illum ser nitħattu dwar kompożituri nisa li ħallew impatt matul l-istorja. Julia, how are you? Welcome to the program and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for having me.
So, the subject we'll be dealing with today is women composers. And it can be said that the participation of women in the classical music world, especially in the 19th century, was not an easy journey. Women were more associated to specific roles, such as, for instance, playing the piano, playing the harp, or singing. And this was done more as a hobby or a pastime rather than to pursue a professional career, such as, for instance, their male counterparts in music who were composers and performers and conductors. This is because professional roles were predominantly occupied by men. And to this effect, we may make reference to an extensive list of legendary male composers. However, few of these are women, not to reduce the merits of the legendary male composers, because it's a fact that, you know, most of their compositions today are considered as testament to great minds. However, unfortunately, it's a fact that few women names are on this list of international composers from that era. However, that is not to say that the 19th century did not bring with it some change when it saw women making their presence more in the music sphere. And although there were talented female musicians, only a few of them managed to break the barrier and make a name for themselves.
Yes, that's true. 19th century is a little bit of a breaking point for women composers and women in general because of nationalism and also the Industrial Revolution, because those two lead to a little bit more independence for women, because they started working in factories, they started be breadwinners as well, and because of that they had a bit more possibility to actually do other things than just take care of the family. And when we are thinking about the 19th century, the main character from the music scene that comes to mind from a woman point of view is Maria Szymanowska, who was a Polish composer and a virtuoso pianist from the beginning of 19th century, not to confuse with Karol Szymanowski. It's not family. And she was one of the first really very successful pianists and composers who toured extensively in Europe and actually made money on playing and composing. And the next one that we can think about is Clara Schumann, wife of Robert Schumann, who was also a brilliant pianist and a composer herself, but mainly she was taking care of her husband and many children that they had together. But later on, after the husband demise, she took over publishing his works and promoting them in concerts, as well as her pieces. And many times she actually earned more money that time. Yes, with the concert, not so much with the composing, unfortunately, but with concerts, you know. So that was another very, very important person in the 19th century. We can move on to another famous, this time a sister of Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy, Fanny Mendelssohn, who again was a talented musician, pianist, composer, as educated as Mendelssohn himself, but because of this Lutheran conservative society they lived in, she was forbidden really to pursue music. And there are anecdotes that some of her works are actually composed under the name of Felix Mendelssohn. So those are those few that for sure nowadays in the school books we can find, but there are many more. Okay, for example, if we think about France, there was Louis Fareng, who was one of the first persons in the Paris Conservatory, who was teaching, who was accepted into composition and then became a professor. We have Cécile Chaminade, who was a very famous composer, pianist and singer. So they nowadays they start to show up, but it's true that when we flip through the music book, the amount of the women composer is very, very small. And many times it was said because they don't have the same brain as men, so they are not capable of doing things, but it's mostly the society that put them in that role.
Yes. And these stories are very interesting because they show the reality that women faced during that time. And one particular story that I think is a typical example of the situation is, as you mentioned, of Fanny Mendelssohn. So if we had to narrate a little bit her story, so even our listeners can understand exactly typically what would happen to a young lady at the time. Fanny Mendelssohn, her brother was Felix Mendelssohn, who is a great composer in his own respect. But because, as you said, of the pressure from her family, it did not really support in her becoming a composer.
Yes.
And as a consequence, she was deprived or denied of the public recognition of her work, and some of them, as you correctly said, they were attributed to her brother Felix. Of course, Felix, as we said, he has done his own work, such as A Midsummer's Night Dream and Song Without
a lot
Words.
Of amazing work.
They are very, very nice pieces. But still, some compositions, for instance, the Easter Sonata, it was written by Fanny Mendelssohn, and then it was published under his name, and it was lost, and then it was rediscovered later on, much later on, that in reality it was written by his sister and not by Felix. And this is something that today we see it as unacceptable because it's theft of someone else's work.
Yes.
But it is the reality that someone has had to face in that time. And of course, it's unfortunate that it happened to a lot of these people, and there were many situations, as you have said, with Schumann and her husband. So these were normal. But these things happened, and in fact, I have here a little snippet of a letter that Felix himself, the brother, had written about his own sister. And in it he had said that, from my knowledge of Fanny, I should say that she has neither inclination nor vocation for authorship. She is too much all that a woman ought to be for this. She regulates the house, and neither thinks of the public, nor the musical world, nor even of music at all. Publishing would only disturb her in these, and I cannot say that I approve of it. So this is her brother,
Yes.
who is writing about his sister, and this really shows the societal expectations that occurred, and it's quite interesting. It's not really interesting. It's quite shocking to hear that the brother would write like this about his supposed beloved sister. So I would let you elaborate more, because I know that you wrote your PhD thesis exactly on this historical aspect and these things that were happening during this period.
Exactly. I mean, the letter you mentioned, it shows exactly that maybe he thought something different in mind, but it was expected that he's going to say something like this. Because on the other hand, Fanny Mendelssohn also had a music soirée. Like it was very popular in the 19th century to have those music salons at home, invite famous musicians, and she would play her songs or her composition or his compositions. But many times this sort of music was also looked at as easy feminine music. So unfortunately, adhering to the social norms was not easy. And those who succeeded, I mean, it's incredible. They had to have a lot of spirit in them to go forward. So the thesis you mentioned, I wrote about two composers from the end of the 19th century. They were born at the end of 19th century and then follow up composing and working in the 20th century. And their achievements are a proof that they follow up in the steps of the other women composers who were present in the 19th century, which I mentioned before, because trying to compose and publish in the 19th century was not an easy thing. Many times, like we heard the story of Mendelssohn, that her works would be published under somebody else's name, or just not published at all. And that's why nowadays we don't have really much.
That's very interesting.
Exactly, we don't have much proofs because many things probably weren't published, were just left as a manuscript and got lost. For example, from Maria Szymanowska, we have quite amount of piano pieces, piano miniatures, studies, dances, and fantasies, which show this early style of brilliance. And then Clara Schumann, she has quite a lot of pieces, not only for piano, but also in chamber music, for voice and piano. And also she wrote a very beautiful piano concerto, so which nowadays is played a bit more. I can't say much more, but let's say a little bit more. And for example, Fanny Mendelssohn, nowadays very famous is one of her nocturnes, which is also transcribed for violin and piano or solo piano. So these are some few works that for sure there can be in the repertoire of a 21st century pianist if he or she wants to focus on women composers. But further to the role of women in the 19th century, important is to also realize that this was the time that women started actually attending higher education in the sense of conservatories to study music, because before that it was really forbidden. So if you wanted to study music as a woman, you either were from a really rich noble family that could afford that, or you were a nun, like the abbess, the German abbess Hildegarda
Von Bingen.
Von Bingen, yes, sorry.
No
so she was the first woman composer that we know of, and she was a very educated nun.
Exactly.
So later on we had these two categories, rich girls or nuns. And in the 19th century, the conservatories slowly, bit by bit, started accepting women. It wasn't always easy, and usually there would be one woman or two. And generally, women were more trained to be piano teachers or instrumental teachers. They weren't expected to be performers because it wasn't really according to the social norms, to be on stage or composing even more. So they were just left to be the piano teachers, music teachers. So even the courses in the conservatories weren't exactly for composition or for piano performance, but more from the pedagogical point of view. So in the 19th century, one of the first conservatories was the French conservatory that allowed women to study music composition. Later on, Stockholm Conservatory, the Royal Academy of Music, followed up. And one of the first major in composition was Valborg Olling, which was a 20th century, woman composer. So they slowly started opening up and even allowing some women to go on sort of, nowadays we would say Erasmus, on some sort of scholarship to other countries, so they can learn a little bit more about different cultures, different traditions, because of course the information wasn't passed as we have nowadays. So the music, if you didn't hear it or you didn't see the music, you wouldn't know about it. So just traveling would be the best way.
Julia, this is turning into a very, very interesting discussion, and I'm sure that probably our listeners are finding it very interesting too. You mentioned a lot of talented women who made the name for themselves and who probably were an inspiration to other women who came after them.
Yes.
And the works of women inspired the works of other women. And many of these brave and determined women made a mark in history and paved the way for what is today a more equal playing field. It can be argued academically whether it's equal or not, but that is probably for another program, because here we're talking about the history. But anyways, they paved the way for what is today a more equal playing field. And as you have mentioned very correctly, throughout the 19th, and now as we're going in our journey, we're nearing the end of the 19th century and going towards the 20th, some women such as Amy Beach and Valborg Olin, they defied the social norms to leave their mark on the classical music. But as we are talking, despite their extraordinary achievements and their great talent, they faced the systematic barriers, which, as you have said, sometimes they relied on their patronage or their publishing under their mere relatives, or to self-finance their studies.
Yes.
So this was quite hard, and it gave them a disadvantage. But their resilience not only challenged the conventions of the time, but also produced even greater work and greater recognition. And it is nowadays today, through academic work such as those carried out by yourself, that their works are gaining the rightful prominence to be displayed in concert halls, and at least, if not in concert halls, if not in the popular concert halls, because the classical audience as well is used to hearing some kind of pieces. When you go to a concerto, sometimes, some concertos, they have to be played. But let's say they are receiving more credit, especially in academic works, such as those carried out by yourself, which really show the complexity and the fact that their value, their level of composition was almost equal to that of their male, let's call them rivals. So I will leave it up to you to explain how it was equal or better than what was going on at the time. And of course, we say almost equal because every piece of work is different, and everyone has his opinion about every piece of music, and it's interpreted differently. And ultimately, to say the truth, if you didn't tell us the name of the composer and we heard the piece of music, we would not realize if it was written by Julia Miller or by Matthew Bugeja or by Redent, who is our sound engineer. Ultimately, it's still a good piece of music, and it's still very inspiring and motivational.
No, definitely. I mean, actually, at some point when some other contemporary composers heard the music of women composers, they tried to pinpoint that this sound is more feminine, or it's not feminine enough. So if it was too feminine, it's not good. If it's, not feminine, sounds very strong, like masculine, it's also not good. It's, so there are those contradictions. And I also, I joked with you that almost equal, but also, I don't want to say that we have to bring out those women composers just because they're women composers and they deserve to be, in the annals of the history. They have to be worthy. There are some compositions by women or men that they're better to be forgotten, Not everything is equal. Yes. So we have to also find a balance. So we also have to be a bit critical towards them. And in my research, I focus mostly on Amy Beach, who was first American woman composer of the 19th century, and compared her with Swedish one that I mentioned before, Valborg Olin, just to see this contrast between women living on different continents, having a bit different social life, and how they dealt with it and how it affected their creativity. What was their attitude towards composing, different compositional tools and influences, and to see if there are any similarities or it's completely different. Because like I said before, I mean, there were times that we didn't have internet. The information was passing very slowly. So, for example, European influence is a little bit different thing. It's much easier to get, especially if you travel. And, for example, Valborg Olin, she was awarded twice a scholarship to study in Denmark and study in France. So she actually learned a little bit more. While on the other hand, we have Amy Beach, who was mostly homeschooled. She had some private piano lessons, some bit of harmony lessons, but mostly she studied just the scores of the old composers like Bach, Beethoven, Brahms. She used to go to a lot of concerts. She supposedly had a very brilliant ear, so she could really write down everything.
That's very, very wonderful.
Which is amazing. And she taught herself by studying the scores of other composers about orchestration and everything else. Besides that, she was a very, very good pianist, so things came easily to her. So to compare those two and think about it, okay, so if you are educated in a school, it means you actually bloom more, or you are closed in the box and you don't see out of it. And then on the other hand, you have Amy Beach, who wasn't in an musical institution, so she didn't have to adhere to so many rules. So it was very interesting to see the contrast. Also, their social life. I mean, Amy Beach was from the wealthy family at early age. At 19 or 20, don't remember exactly now, she married much older doctor who supported her whole life. But he didn't want her to study music in an institution or even to publish or even to perform. She could perform maybe once, twice a year for a charity, but not to make money. But he always encouraged her to write more. So that was good. On the other hand, Valborg Olin, she was from a very musical family. She had a very talented brother, violinist, who was also a composer, which was a little bit imbalanced. A similar story like with Felix Mendelssohn and Fanny Mendelssohn. Probably he is mentioned in the dictionaries and books. She's not. She's sometimes the sister of Thor Olin. So at some point, she never married, so she had to support herself. So she used to write a lot of small miniatures. till some point. And then she left after her studies. When she came back from firstly Denmark and then France, she came back to Stockholm. She stopped composing and she moved to Örebro, which is a smaller town in Sweden, and she's focused on teaching. And there are no really documents to tell us why. Probably because of the social norms, or maybe it was too difficult to break that glass ceiling. In that case, Amy Beach succeeded much more because in the United States, she's a celebrated composer, first woman composer who composed the symphony, a Gaelic symphony, piano concerto, many songs, a lot of chamber music, a lot of music for piano, pedagogical, but also advanced. So you can see how different it is.
And you have said that you, during your studies, you compared the works of these two, let's call them very legendary female composers, pioneer actually, female composers. And you chose to compare these two because of their different backgrounds. As you said, one was more of a homeschool type of education, and the other one had more of an institutionalized education. Yes. What were your final findings on their harmony, on their melody, on their orchestration? What was the difference between their approach? Obviously, both good approaches, because the music, there is a bad approach, but there are many good approaches. Yes. So what was the final outcome for this discovery?
Well, at first, it looked like Amy Beach is more creative. Okay, so actually not being taught in a school, in a proper music school, maybe freed her to see outside of the box and be more colorful, more expressive. Valborg Olin, on the other hand, maybe her approach was a little bit more conservative, although her harmonies were also quite adventurous. What was very interesting, it was the score itself, how clear it is. Like, for example, Amy Beach scores, the writing, sometimes you would think, this could be in a different key or a different note.
Oh, wow.
It would be much easier to understand. Like at first, when you sight read first time, it's like, it's a bit tough. And on the other hand, Valborg Olin was very clear. You know exactly which notes you're supposed to play. But then the difference was also in editing, because we have to remember that Amy Beach was a published composer. So her pieces were edited to be published. So then later on, all the dynamics, all the tempo indications, they are very clear. You know exactly what to do. While Valborg Olin, her piano sonata that I analyzed, it was a student work, very good student work, but it was still in a manuscript. So it was never published, never edited to be published. So it has a lot of parts that you have to really think, really, that's what she meant, Okay. So there are some ambiguities there. So this was interesting to contrast, and I didn't want to, come up with a conclusion that yes, Amy Beach is much better because she was more creative out of the box. Because on one hand, maybe it wasn't fair because the other one, it was a student work that maybe she had to be influenced by other composers. When you have those sort of exercises at school, please write a piece like Mozart or something like that. So that was the difference. But overall, I chose them because they were from the end of 19th century, different social life, different continents, and I wanted to see if the music influences were similar, despite this distance, this physical distance. And actually, they both have the same similar influences, while Amy Beach has maybe more Germanic influences because of her teachers who were students of Liszt or Van Bülow. But then Valborg Olin also have some connection to Liszt, so those things
yes, then they get blurred. And
exactly.
The most important thing is that they were both two works of good quality, but it's good to undertake this academic analysis of what could have been the reason. And now, as we reach towards the end of our program, this wonderful discussion, the time actually flew. I didn't realize half an hour has almost passed. It's very good to know that the achievements of many of these women, not all but many, have been recognized, and some of their works are nowadays integrated into the music curriculum of several different universities and other music institutions. And institutions and educators are now including these compositions in their anthologies. For instance, the Historical Anthology of Music of Women. There is actually a whole book.
Yes, I have that.
And it features works by a lot of the composers we mentioned, so Mendelssohn, Schumann, Beach, and it's very nice that we can use their surname, not simply their name and surname for it.
Exactly.
So Mendelssohn is Felix Mendelssohn, but it's also Fanny Mendelssohn in this case, or Schumann, it's both of them. And so that's very nice that there is music history, music theory, women's study courses. So all this is very good. I don't know if you have some concluding comments before we go towards the end of our program.
Just to say, to follow up on inclusion of women composers. For example, my interest in this topic came up when I was teaching a student for her grade 5 ABRSM, and one of the pieces was Amy Beach, a small composition, and we got really interested and started following it on YouTube. And then she showed me, there is the whole clip of different women composers, and that's how I came across Valborg-Olin. So it's thanks to including them in the popular editions for students taking the exam. So I'm really grateful for that. And I'm happy that I can start presenting those pieces, because I recently came back from Rome, where I played a concert showing off Amy Beach and Valborg-Olin. So, and I think for Valborg-Olin it was the first time to be played in Rome. So
I'm very happy to hear.
I was very excited to do so.
So, dear Julia, thank you very much for your presence and for your active participation, not only in this program, but also in the field of academic contribution towards this topic. Your knowledge and your experience, together with the information and the stories you provided, actually really did contribute to this program, and I'm happy that you have shared your research a little bit with us.
Thank you for having me.
Special thanks also goes to our listeners and our technical crew. I never forget to mention our great redent on the sound desk, Selene and Mary Roof from Campus 103.7, and all the team that is involved in bringing such a wonderful initiative to our airwaves. Thank you, Julia, and it was a real pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for having me.
Until next program. Thank you.